New England is considered to be one of the two birthplaces of America. While tourists flock to iconic historic sites like Salem or Plymouth Rock to see their carefully managed displays, few know that the New England forests are home to scores of forgotten ghost towns, each with their own lost story. Today we explore the legend and tales of 3 unique ghost towns of New England. Number 1. Dogtown. Our first ghost town began during the early period of the settlement of Massachusetts in 1643, when it was used as common grazing land by nearby towns. At the time, it was the land of the Agawam tribe, who rented it to the settlers but were soon not paid by them. By 1693, many settlers were living there and were forced to pay back the tribe after losing in court. Some say the name Dogtown first came from the wild dogs of the rocky inland region, its plentiful wolves, or from household dogs that women kept to guard their homes, while their men were away in the Revolutionary War. Once many square miles in size, the town grew in population during the conflict as people fled inland to its thick forests and rocky landscapes to escape the shelling and attacks of British ships, pirates, and native tribes. In fact, it was just outside of Dogtown where the Battle of Gloucester was to occur, in which the Marquis de Lafayette and General Nathaniel Greene would defeat British General William Howe. 2 men from Dogtown were known to fight in this war, Isaac Dade at Yorktown and Peter Lurvy, who died fighting the ship HMS Falcon as it attacked the coast. At its peak, shortly after the war, the town may have housed some 100 families, living in often large upper-class houses, with timber and farming being the major industries. However, after the war, people began to return to their coastal towns and the area entered a decline, as new roads and economies on the coast continued to grow. In these declining decades, the area began to become associated with social outcasts who moved in to rent the empty lands and abandoned homes. Many of these were considered to be witches, such as the famous Thomasine Younger, known locally as Queen of the Witches. She told fortunes, brewed rum, sold curses, and those passing her lands would leave offerings of food to her for safe passage. There was also Rachel Smith, who made a dire drink of foxberry leaves and spruce tops and would invite young guests to dance and make merry. Yet another was Loose George, who would curse oxen and fishermen. There was also Judith Rhines and a woman named Peg Wesson, and lastly, Granny Rich, who would make potions of berries and tell fortunes with coffee grounds. Alongside these witches were other outcasts like escaped or freed slaves, cross-dressers, and itinerants that took up residence there. More famous characters included Granny Day, a schoolteacher, Abraham Wharf, who died by cutting his own throat, prostitutes Molly Jacobs and Liz Tucker, cross-dressers Sammy Stanley and Old Ruth, and James Mary, a huge man who would wrestle a bull that he raised and trained for bets, until the day it won and he was found dead. He is now buried under an inscribed stone I once stumbled onto on a side path. Most of the inhabitants in these years were incredibly poor, living in collapsing homes and living off berries, cabbages, and sheep. During the War of 1812, the area proved to be useless against evading the cannons of the British, and even more left until, in 1830, the last resident, known as Black Neil, a friend of the late Judith Rhines, was found in the cellar of a collapsed house with frozen legs. Shortly after this, he died at a local poorhouse. The last house in town burned in 1845, leaving a large rocky area used for grazing until the 1920s. With their owners now gone, it also soon became home to large packs of stray dogs. Somehow, despite the last house being gone, the legends of the town have lived on, becoming bigger and stranger by the year, as the huge 3,600-acre settlement, now lying surrounded by populated coastal towns, became a tangled wilderness, home to sheep and a few pig pens, and visited sometimes by bayberry pickers and picnickers. Later, a millionaire investor from a family that once lived in Dogtown bought much of the land. Roger Babson was the founder of Babson College, Assistant Secretary of Commerce to President Woodrow Wilson, and author of many books including Cheer Up, Better Times Ahead, and a predictor of the stock market crash of 1929. He had fallen in love with the boulders and cellars of Dogtown as a child and undertook a strange project during the Great Depression. Babson would hire unemployed Finnish stonecutters to map and inscribe numbers on stones to mark 45 of the old cellar holes and some 36 carved inspirational motto stones. With an aim to create a rags to riches image and run for president, he made an Abraham Lincoln-esque log cabin in Dogtown to live in. He ran in 1940 under the New Prohibition Party with an anti-tax, pro-farmer, and moral platform, coming in 4th place. He would later die in 1967, donating the area to a trust to be kept as an untouched public space. Today it's a huge and wild area with rare flowers, popular boulders like Peter's Pulpit and Whale's Jaw, a reservoir, and countless trails. However, it is also still an area of twisted trees, empty cellars, and local folklore of werewolf men, which started with the local Agawam tribe belief that a special plant being eaten would turn one into a man with a dog's head. The legend grew in 1984 when a man reported seeing a huge dog-like animal, and later a torn-up but not eaten deer was found, and then the same year, 2 others reported seeing a large, gray dog-like creature. Later that year, a woman named Ann Natty was ambushed, stripped, strangled, and beaten to death with a rock by Peter Hodgkins Jr., a mentally disturbed man who frequented Dogtown. After some days of hiding in the woods, he was arrested, tried, and convicted of murder. In the years since, a creepy circle of decaying stuffed animals left by somebody in the woods has not helped with his reputation for the strange. Once you get off the main trail that was once the road into the town square, the size and maze-like quality of the trails starts to make a real impression on the psyche. It's very easy to get lost, but that's part of the fun. I've been to Dogtown a number of times. On our first trip, we made it to a stone called Peter's Pulpit. We lacked a map and needed to head back as darkness was falling. I scanned a QR code next to a stone that promised trail information. Instead of this, the language of my phone changed to Chinese, and unable to use it or find the menu to change back to English, we used it for a light as it became pitch black outside and we had no flashlights. As we stumbled down paths eventually ending up in a swamp, we began to hear a woman screaming in the distance. Maybe an hour later, we made it out to the car where police officers on ATVs drove up and asked if we'd heard people yelling. We said yes, and they drove down the trail as I took this shot to remember that weird day. Anywhere you go off the trail, markers can often be found. This one marked by 16 was the home of James Demerit, a farmer. His cellar is now a pit filled with thorn bushes. It's impossible to show all the cellars, but we're going to check out a few. On 4 trips to date, I've still not seen them all myself. Coming along to get lost with us today is Free Spirit, who you might know from our Arkham Asylum Explorer and others.
Yep.
This large boulder marked 18 was the home of Isaac Dade, who fought in the Revolution.
Oh, it's a little difference between 17 and 18. That's the one that makes your phone break.
Oh, so don't do
Don't
it.
scan that. It will definitely not be good.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Stone 19 marks out the brothel house of Molly Jacobs, Liz Tucker, and the witch Judy Rhines.
Under the third tree.
Number 20, in front of us, was the home of Granny Day, a woman who used her house as a school. Adjacent to this is a swamp known as Granny Bog.
There is indeed a bit of a cellar hole. It's very full of trees, but yep.
These two stones mark out Dogtown Square, the old intersection of roads at the town center.
Dogtown Square. I don't know about that. Listen, you Marines.
Past the town center are the carved boulders of Babson, with sayings meant as lessons to others during the Great Depression years. We can't show you them all, as there are so many, but we'll be passing a few on this trail.
Oh,
Creep out of debt.
oh, there's all these little tiny mushrooms. Mushrooms this time. They're cute. Little ones everywhere. Yep.
Number 22 marks the house of Joseph Riggs, a large landowner. Even without its creepy events, this ghost town is an eerie place. Tangled paths lead off in all directions, looping around boulders, through thorns and vines, and crooked apple trees, now grown wild after their owners have become just a memory. I've seen campfires in the woods from the homeless population who sometimes make camps or houses of sticks. At night, one can hear scrapes and noises of night hawkers, illegal metal detectorists digging cellar holes and boulders for valuables, likely including the lost 1698 treasure the pirate Captain Kidd possibly buried here. We start to get a bit lost after taking a wrong turn, all part of the Dogtown experience.
This is the main trail,
For some reason, I've never done a shoot at these stones, and this being a favorite, we stopped by to take some.
Video you got there.
Quite the video, yes it is. I feel like it's showing a lot of integrity.
Oh. Sure about that?
I don't know if it's yes. It's a good thing to have. Yeah.
As we start to head back, we run into one of the stick houses you sometimes see here. While Dogtown is known for boulders, cellar holes, and myths, most recently, a surprising new addition to the legend of the dog-headed man of the Agawam and the large creature spotted in 1984 has added to its strange story. The recent appearance of coy wolves, the descendants of eastern wolves who mixed with coyotes due to a lack of mates and genetically are 60% coyote, 30% wolf, and 10% dog. These hybrids now live in Dogtown and other nearby areas. We quickly find out as a pack begins to seemingly trail us, howling and getting closer and closer as darkness falls. As we're some way from the edge of Dogtown, we shut off the cameras to move faster over the rocky hills and faint paths, finally finding our way to the car in the pitch darkness.
Hang on. Yeah. There's no way.
An interesting end to an exploration and a sign that Dogtown is no longer a true ghost town, but once again fittingly home to the very descendants of the lost pets of its townspeople and the wolves that once thrived here before them. Number 2. Livermore. A once busy town now lies forgotten along a river in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, down a steep cliff-sided dirt road. Once the site of a logging camp and a town of 200 individuals, it is now overgrown and forgotten. Founded by Charles Saunders in 1874, it sat upon 75,000 acres of land first purchased from the New England timber king, Nicholas Norcross. First known as the Elkins Grant, the Saunders brothers then administered it through the newly created Grafton County Lumber Company and the Sawyer River Railroad. The first buildings included the 9-mile-long railroad line that connected to the Portland and Ogdensburg Railroad and a steam sawmill. 7 lumber camps were then created and housed workers. After 1 year, the lumber mill burned and had to be rebuilt. In 1876, the town became official, and by 1880, there were 100 people and 18 buildings. The next year, a post office was built, and soon after, a one-room school with state-of-the-art equipment, considered at the time to be the best in the state. By the turn of the century, the town had telephone service and around 200 people, a church, barn, stable, blacksmith shop, ice house, charcoal kiln, and a boarding house, though it shrunk in size by half due to land sales and conflict with the town of Lincoln. Work at the mills and camp was hard, and many workers upon receiving their supplies would desert once they realized the challenges. Those that stayed bought their needs at the company store, earning anywhere from $1.75 a day to $1.25 a day, and producing up to 11 million feet of lumber yearly. Those that could not pay their bills had to be coerced by an armed man the Saunders hired, who did in fact shoot one worker. Some workers would die from being run over by the train or by falling trees at the harsh winter logging camps. By 1919, the mill had burned again, along with damage to the Saunders family mansion, and the town had shrunk to around 100 inhabitants. By this time, the town was run by 3 Saunders sisters who hired Clinton Nash as manager. By 1920, the new mill was rebuilt, but a huge flood in 1927 damaged the railroad, bridges, and mill, and by 1929, with the start of the Great Depression, the lumber market took a nosedive. By 1930, just over 20 people lived in the town, as the shuttered mill and rail line caused the post office and store to close as well. In 1936, most of the town was sold to the Forest Service and the town dissolved. The railroad line, which had always been dangerous and accident-prone, with trains falling off into the gorge, was converted into a dirt road. By 1946, the town had just 2 residents who would not talk to each other, until, in 1951, Clinton Nash inherited the land and became the only one living there. In 1953, he auctioned off the furniture in the massive and run-down Saunders mansion, which was the main building remaining. Nash then lived in the huge 4-story, 26-room derelict mansion on the 12 acres left that was once the downtown. He eventually moved to its cellar at the age of 90 as it decayed. That year, in 1963, he sold it to Bob Shackford, who used some of its wood to build a small house that still stands there today. As vandalism and destruction from visitors wrecked the house, Shackford then decided to burn the mansion in 1965. In 1992, Bob Shackford died, leaving the small house surrounded by the mansion's garden walls and the White Mountains National Forest, where you can still see it today. We start along a tall wall that once was the foundation and is the only remaining trace of the Saunders mansion today. The track once was a footpath between the mansion and the rail line seen here. Normally Thinkmaker does the recording, but I take up the camera myself this time. A number of buildings once stood here, and somebody has collected pieces of metal they detected or dug from the underbrush into a pile. The land here is owned by the Forest Service, so this may not be legal. The remains of a clawfoot bathtub, possibly from the mansion, lies on the ground. The power of the mountain river here never ceases to impress me. Across the water are 2 cement prongs matching the set on the near side. These are remnants of the town's water line that once crossed the river to a housing section known as Little Canada, of which nothing is known. Old apple trees like the one you see here are great ways to find once inhabited sites. On the ground are some old tools and scraps of equipment.
Snake was running away from me. Well, not running, but snakes can't run. They have legs. Ah, you found the campground. We got a bed for the night. All set up.
Right? Creature comfort.
Very creature comfort.
The old bed I point out to Raziel's dream lies on the old railroad track bed.
That's the old power plants up here. Cool. One of the good ones. It's the major remnant of the town, pretty much.
The cement foundations, which are quite extensive and 150 feet by 30 feet, are all the remains of the old steam-powered sawmill destroyed by the 1927 flood. A jumble of brick walls now marks the edge of the site of the town's power plant. The original smokestack is the most visible part remaining. The way up to it is quite treacherous, with shifting fallen walls, rocks, and branches. The plant would have burned coal to create steam power at the mill next door, and may have been moved or been rebuilt repeatedly.
Yep. I would not feel super comfortable with that. Ugh.
Somehow, even here, there's some graffiti. We head back up the old path to the site of the company store. It stood near the old train depot, and there seemed to be some possibly related artifacts here.
I've seen some, they're pheasants or partridges or something running around.
We also find something I've somehow missed on previous trips. There appears to be a large and incredibly heavy safe in the store foundations.
Oh yeah, it is very ornate. Interesting.
The lock mechanism on the inside here. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Wow, look at that. You didn't even touch it.
Wow. This thing must have weighed fucking
Yeah, that's a base.
Look at the concrete on here. It looks like concrete on the inside of it.
Get those little details. Take a picture.
Yeah, that's gonna be better than this video.
I don't remember that ever being there.
Bet it was. Probably just covered in stuff.
And it took some stuff here.
Yeah.
Detail work on this?
Yeah.
It's like sand, huh? That's great.
Video? Ah. Yeah, alright. Tricked me.
Roughly here, further down the hill from the small house that now stands in the gardens of the mansion's site, was the main street called Railroad Row. It was once sided by wooden houses. Other than the interesting artifacts I've found in the river, it simply offers an amazing view. Of course, the best part here is that it's a scenic place to kick back and relax after a long hike and maybe take some photos. If you have the chance and find yourself in the White Mountains National Park, this is a must-see if you're looking for an interesting experience and a glimpse into a lost past. Every time I've gone, I've found something new. I encourage you to see it for yourselves. Number 3. MONSON. Our last ghost town today is one of the best maintained and easiest to see in New England, but it's also not very well known. It is also one of the oldest, having been founded in 1737. The area of 17,000 acres was incorporated in 1746 as the first inland town of New Hampshire, and its early families included the Goulds, Wallingfords, Nevins, Baileys, and Browns. However, bad soil, poor planning, and bad weather all doomed the town to failure. Due to the poor lands, families lived scattered far apart. There was no meeting house or official buildings, and people outside of the town who did not pay taxes owned much of the land, so there was no money for a town government. In 1770, just 24 years after its incorporation, it was divided between the towns of Hollis and Amherst, with its 350 people split between the towns. After being chipped away at by new buildings and lots, in 1998, a developer bought the last lands where Monson's town center once stood, and after a local preservation fight, the area was saved and converted into a public space with trails that now lead in loops past 12 or so cellar holes, a tiny graveyard, and a cattle pound marker, ending in a swamp with herons and beaver dams. Every cellar hole at this unique archaeological site has been carefully labeled, the past maintained, and the area kept just as it was at its abandonment. The key to this is Russ Dickerman, who is the caretaker and works there many days retelling the town's story. When you first enter the dirt road the ghost town lies on, the land opens before you into an almost disorienting period scene with fields, walls, and somehow a single original house, the 1756 Gould residence, fully restored and now used as a museum. It's a very scenic place and somehow makes you feel like you've been transported into the past. For this explore, sadly, we used the unpopular camera from our last video, the GoPro 6, which heavily distorts, turning people into Oompa Loompas and the world into a funhouse mirror reflection. I promise to not use it again.
Oh, it's pretty fucking hot out here. I think it's less about hurting yourself than it is about hurting the walls.
Probably.
Chipmunk. Yep.
He's like, I don't give a fuck about you. Yeah. Yeah, you got food for me? Yeah.
Probably like open for.
The Gould House lies at the start of two loops that cover most of the town's old cellars. You can see inside some of the original period furnishings, though Russ isn't here today.
It's gonna be the star of the show. Yep, he's pretty cute.
Window with the camera because it's furnished.
very hot.
The unintended flapping of the sandals.
Yep, it's keeping time. Yeah, I ordered new ones. These were a mistake. They only have one strap, and they're the not leather material, and they stretched out like instantly, so they're way too big already.
Yep.
So I have a pair of leather 2-strap ones coming tomorrow, I think. They did cost a little more, but
We head down the main road and take a left towards the other main town road.
yes, into the woods.
Yep.
Oh, the center
Get a picture, get a video of
of the
that.
old town of Monson.
Get up close enough.
A marker stands here, a sort of grave to a lost town. One of the best parts about Monson is not just how little it has changed since the 1700s, but that it offers some great walks through nature.
Somewhere up here there's a house.
You okay? Are you excited? Are you being live? Is that it? Is that what's happening?
It's somebody's house.
If I was dying, I'd go that way.
Down into the hole.
Down into the hole, why not?
Lieutenant David Wallingsford.
Sometimes a cellar hole is just a hole. This one isn't too inspiring and the sign unreadable, but it was the home of Lieutenant David Wallingford, who fought in the battles of Lexington and Concord, Bunker Hill, and Bennington in the Revolutionary War.
12 children. He had 12 children born here.
Gotta use them up good.
And his wife remarried.
On the land.
That's interesting. So he died on March 12th, 1791, and then his wife married Nehemiah Barker on March 12th, 1799.
Tramp.
8
They were
years
already
later
together,
to the day of his death.
This reminds me of the little, like, stream that close to where the basically died out on point. I think we took a cruise run or something.
We stop at the next cellar hole, which is perhaps the best preserved and most complex of them all. It was home to Richard Bailey, the town shoe cobbler, and burned when his family was away. The day is boiling hot, and having taken the wrong trail, we miss some cellar holes. In the end, while we leave early to another place, I encourage you to see this town for yourself if you've ever been intrigued by the idea of a ghost town. It remains one of the best kept secrets of them all. I hope you've enjoyed these 3 haunting ghost towns of a lost New England. Join us next time as we kick off a short series of 4 explorations and stories of historic ruins in Scotland and Ireland with the 7 Towers.